Welcome back to the MSU Deer Labs online seminar series brought to you by the Mississippi State University Extension Service and the Forest and Wildlife Research Center. I'm Bronson Strickland and I will be the presenter today. I'd like to also acknowledge my co-author, Steve Damaris, colleague of mine and co-director of the MSU Deer Lab. Today I want to focus on all of the aspects of getting a place prepared to plant for food plots. What are all the things you need to do ahead of time, planting equipment, etc. So that's really what this presentation is about, is the background and preparation for a food plot system on your property. Okay, the next phase of conditions and issues, things I wanted to talk about for successful food plots, I would put in the step 3 category, and that's more about preparing the soil and the actual planting. We've kind of already discussed pH and fertilizer. Let's talk about the seed bed. Let's talk about some planting techniques, herbicides. One thing a lot of people don't discuss, I'm going to show you some tricks with this about seed and good seed. And of course, the one thing that's so very important that none of us can control is rain. I included the next 2 slides because I really wanted to zoom in and just show you how important it is to have a good seed bed. And just think about this, however you're preparing the soil, disking the soil, whatever technique you use, is keeping this fundamental concept in mind, is having good soil to seed contact. Absolutely critical. Think if you have a situation where you're disking, but it's disked very poorly, you don't have a good smooth seed bed, you can just envision you're going to have a situation where the seed is not going to be in a good environment. It's not going to have good contact with the soil, or it's not even going to be covered up by the soil, and you're going to have a lot of mortality because of that. So that's the fundamental concept to keep in mind. Here's an example here. This food plot was top sown, and that's what most people are going to do. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. But you'll see some wheat seeds here. And there's wheat, another wheat, another wheat, and this is an Austrian winter pea here. And you can see that it just being on the ground. So this was broadcast, is how it was spread. We cultipacked it, which you'll see that a little bit later in a slide. But then just the rain itself, is going to wash some of that soil off the seed. So we do have the benefit of it having contact with the soil, but you can also see what kind of a fragile environment this is going to be. It had been so much better if that Austrian winter pea was just a 1/4 inch, maybe a 1/2 inch would be a much better environment for that seed when you think about those first few days and weeks of life. Another thing to consider over long periods of time, this is something you can control or not control. The longer amount of time you have with those seeds on top of the soil when they're completely exposed is you're going to get a lot of different animals are going to eat some of those seeds. So you'll see flocks of turkeys, you'll see crows, even little small mammals will consume the seeds. So the best thing to do is to have them covered up. But if you can't do that, just keep in mind you're probably going to want your seeding rate to be a little higher so that you can compensate for some of the mortality and seed loss that you're certainly going to have. Now the different planting equipment options. Should you use a tractor or an ATV? Well, I would opt to always have a tractor available, but there are certainly situations where you're not going to have a tractor available. You may only have an ATV or UTV, and you can, without a doubt, develop successful food plots without the use of a tractor. Now, that saying, having a tractor is going to make you a lot more flexibility, give you a lot more flexibility. You're going to be able to do a lot more with a tractor. So incorporating a disc and being able to turn the soil over, is just so much easier with a tractor as opposed to an ATV. So you can get it done with an ATV, but you have more limitations and you're going to have to work a little bit harder. A cultipacker, which I'll show you in a moment, is a great device to have, a great implement. A drag harrow, we'll go over that as well. And then, of course, you're going to have some way to spread the seed. If you have really small plots, doing it by hand may be completely sufficient. At a bigger scale, you're going to want some kind of spreader that you can pull behind an ATV or tractor. And then the best possible option would actually be a seed drill, and I'll show you one of those in a moment. Okay, this is your typical scenario, tractor with a disc, and this was for some research plots we were doing years ago. And just emphasizing here what you can get done in a relatively less amount of time with a tractor versus if you were trying to do that with an ATV and some of the little discs that you can pull behind an ATV. You can get it done, but it's going to depend on the soil conditions. If you're in my neck of the woods and have really clay soils, it could be really tough to have the weight and the horsepower with an ATV or UTV to really, you know, turn the soil over. And so it's just made a lot easier with a tractor if you have one available. This is something we do quite commonly. When we have a big planting day, we'll have one person on a tractor. That's kind of step one. They'll go to a plot, disc it, turn the soil over, and to speed things up a little bit, we'll then put a cultipacker on the back of our UTV, and then we'll run over that several times. And again, it's just breaking up as many of the larger clods of soil as we can. Again, trying to make a smooth, nice seed bed so we can maximize seed to soil contact. Here's an example of a drag harrow. I think a drag harrow is probably the one food plot instrument that you will see homemade more often than you'll see manufactured. And so you'll see all different shapes, sizes, makes, models. Probably the most common is someone will get a section of chain link fence and then put a 2x4 on both ends of it, you know, and wrap it up with wire or something like that. Add a few bricks to it to add some weight. But that is really common for people, especially if you're just going to be planting clover, is you'll go through and disc the soil up as best you can, overseed it, you know, with clover, and just use a drag harrow to cover it up very, very lightly. This is a cultipacker, but at an agricultural scale. You saw the little one that we commonly use pull behind our UTV, and of course it's a lot lighter. It's not going to get the job done as well or as quickly as something like this with this kind of rig. But remember, the purpose of this is taking the ground that it may have been disked previously, you know, literally minutes, hours, days before, but you are making the planting surface more uniform. And here you have the Cadillac of planting equipment, the seed drill. And I am not lucky enough to have one of these, so I will probably get, in fact, I know I'm going to get the exact terminology wrong, but I can walk you through this practically to show you what it's doing. And in essence, think about creating the best possible environment for every seed. And so what happens here, seed is loaded up top here, and all these little tubes, this is where the seed is going to come down. This little wheel or disc here is actually going to cut a little furrow in the soil at the appropriate depth that you're going to set, and then seed is going to fall out here, fall out of these tubes, and go directly into at a specified and calibrated rate. So a seed every inch, a seed every 2 inches, whatever. So it's going to come out at the specified rate and depth that you have set. And then these wheels here are going to come along behind, and basically it's not going to cover it up, but it's essentially going to kind of press the soil in. And so at a very quick but mass scale that you're planting, The goal is to create the best possible environment in terms of seed soil contact, depth, and seeding rate that you can with one instrument. So these things are really, really good. The practical side is that you will often see the seed rate is only going to be about 75 to 80% of the seeding rate that you would have for broadcasts. And that is because you're going to have far less mortality with this. A greater proportion of your seed is going to survive, therefore you don't need to plant as much seed. So there will be a cost, a savings in terms of seed purchase. The downside is that these instruments are really, really expensive. Depending on where you are at, often at the county scale through NRCS, these can be rented. So that might be one thing you could check with your county extension service, check with your county agent, check with NRCS, and again, check at your local seed and fertilizer store or co-op or something like that, and just see what the availability is to see if one can be rented for just a day or two, and it could save you a lot of time and some money in terms of seed cost. Okay, some planting methods specific to particular forages, and I'm lumping here large seed and I'm lumping small seed. Some examples of large seed are going to be your cereal grains, oats, wheat, cereal rye, something on the warm season side, something like cowpeas. But again, that larger seed, you want to get that a minimum of 1/4 of an inch down to about an inch deep. So you definitely want to have soil covering those particular species. The smaller seeds, it's not as critical. Again, you are going to get germination on top of the ground with things like clover, rape, chicory. So just broadcasting and walking away, followed by a good rain, you're going to get a lot of germination. The best possible thing you can do is cover it up about 1/4 of an inch. So again, that would be best case scenario. And like I spoke about earlier, it is very common to broadcast this small seed and then use something like a drag harrow or even a cultipacker to come along beside it to really press that seed into the soil. Some advice: do not mix large seed and small seed together in a single application. So if you're putting your seed, all the seed in a hopper, let's say you're doing a mix of white clover and wheat, it is not advisable to put the clover seed and the wheat in the same hopper, hook it up to the back of a four-wheeler, and then bounce around your food plot and spread it. The reason for that is the small seed, again, like rape, like some of your clovers, white clover is a great example. Every time that hopper is vibrating, moving, bouncing, the smaller seed is going to gravitate, it's going to move to the bottom, and it's going to come out before a lot of your cereal grain or like wheat would. So I have seen this firsthand because I have done it. And mixed together that seed and came back a month later looking at germination, looking at the food plot growing, and I noticed the first couple passes I made in the food plot, there was a high proportion of that area was clover, and nowhere else on the food plot was clover. It was all wheat, and that was simply the clover seed becoming separated out as further I went spreading the seed, again, it moving to the bottom and coming out first. So a mistake I hope you will not make. This mix here to me is acceptable. You can see the cereal grains very clearly. In there should be wheat and oats. The kind of bluish, the smaller seed that you see is crimson clover with a seed coat on it. Crimson clover seed is larger than something like white clover, and then with the seed coat on top of it, it's big enough to where you don't see this separation. And then the other big seed there is Austrian winter pea. So this particular mix, the clover seed was large enough it did not pose a problem. However, in other instances with smaller clover seed, and then when it did not have a seed coat on it, it presented the problem I spoke about earlier.